and welcome to another episode of Simply Medicare. I'm your host, Debbie Stroup, your Michigan Medicare specialist. On this episode, we're talking to Mr. Craig Nash, who incidentally has his own podcast. And so we're going to learn a little bit about Craig and his very interesting journey, something that he was not expecting or anticipating, but is really on a really wonderful journey right now. And I'm really excited to learn more about that and have our listeners and our viewers listen to your story as well, because like you said, there's probably more people than not out there doing the same thing that you're doing. So let's start. Craig, welcome. We're so glad to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Debbie. I really appreciate it because the situation that we're talking about at It's a Grand Life, where grandparents are actually becoming parents again of their grandchildren, is a very common phenomenon here in the state of Michigan and the whole country. In the state of Michigan, for example, there are 45,000 kids that are being raised by relatives in the home. And I thought there was just a handful of us out here, but I knew there were a lot more when a friend of mine who was having a support group for grandparents that are raising their grandchildren in their church had 16 couples, 16 grandparents that were raising their grandchildren. So we got into this because I was listening to a sermon one time, and the pastor was saying, look, don't waste your pain. If you're going through a tough time in life and you can be a blessing to other folks, you need to share that, because there may be something out of your journey that can bless other folks. And that's why we launched It's a Grand Life a couple months ago. And we've slowly but surely seen the audience start building. And I knew we were on the right path when there was a lady that I worked with 6 years ago who manages a senior living center in Macomb County. And I hadn't talked to her in 6 years since I left that company. And she reached out and said, my husband and I have just started raising our 3 grandchildren, and the youngest one is 3 years old. Our daughter is fighting heroin addiction. She said, I was so alone till I heard your podcast. So we do think by faith, you can have a grand life and you can make an impact on the next generation. But there's a lot of challenges with it, but that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get subject matter experts together on our podcast to talk about how do you deal with insurance, for example. What are some of the legalities that you wrestle with, and what about should I be seeing a psychotherapist? Should my child be talking to a psychotherapist? And we've had some pretty positive responses to that, and if we can help one person, the thought was it's worth doing. So that was the thought behind it.
So tell us, begin at the beginning, if you will. Tell us your journey about you're going through life, you're thinking about retiring, or maybe you had retired and you encountered some bumps. I know it wasn't just all of a sudden. I know it was things you were kind of working up to. So can you kind of share your journey about that?
Sure.
Because I'm sure, like you said, there's a lot of us out there that either are in that same journey or know somebody who is.
Well, we my wife and I, we've been married, it'll be 35 years in June. And we, like most of the folks we know, we tried to do things the right way for our kids, tried to put a few shekels away so they could go to college and do all the necessary planning and what have you. But there's some things in life you can't plan for. And when my daughter was in a junior or senior in high school, she was sexually assaulted by a member of the football team. And we didn't know this at the time. She was still very reserved about this and kept these cards close to her vest for 5 or 6 years until certain behaviors started coming out. She started hanging around with different kids and really didn't fit in very well when she went to college and started getting around the drug crowd. And one thing led to another, and her lifestyle had just done an entire 360, a total turnaround from this conservative, faith-based young lady to one who was just pretty wild. And so we started to see these behaviors. And then when she was a sophomore in college, she had a bit of a meltdown, and we did not know why she had this meltdown. She said it was because she had a roommate that was leaving, but that wasn't true. There was another assault that occurred in her life, and it just upset her so much that she ended up dropping out of school. And we started this downward path where she had a hard time retaining employment, and we started to see behavioral health issues pop up, and of course there was this increased substance abuse that was going on, and my wife and I, we just didn't want to believe it was as serious as it was. And then all of a sudden, one day, it was in right around Easter of 2012, my daughter made the announcement that she was pregnant with our granddaughter. And that was a real shock to us. And we were thrilled that we're very much pro-life family. So we were very pleased that she wanted to keep the baby, but it was just such a curve in all of our planning that it set us back a little bit. But we said, hey, we're going to adjust to this. We're going to embrace this situation. God has brought this little one in our lives. We're going to do the very best we can to make mom and daughter as comfortable as possible. So we actually remodeled our home, and wanted in the most perfect of all worlds. We wanted to have a situation where our daughter could go back to school. We'd heard all sorts of stories of folks, hey, they get pregnant, but that doesn't mean their life's over. They go back to school, they finish their degree, and that was our hope and prayer for our daughter. But for her, that was not to be. She could not focus on the schoolwork. And again, this group of friends that she started hanging out with were very much in the drug crowd, and she started staying out for hours at a time, and not hours at a time, but days at a time. And we were essentially raising our granddaughter without the credentials or my wife and I were doing it with the idea that we're going to support our daughter till the light comes on and she can become the mom. And unfortunately, the light never did come on. And we had some situations where in one of our podcasts, we talk about a situation where I never prayed so hard in my life. My daughter and I were working together. I had owned a physical therapy network of clinics for 20 years. And I had recently several years ago, sold the clinics to a company in Oakland County. And I got my daughter a job there. And because her behavior was pretty normal at this point, just a young millennial cutting up. And so she went to work one day and had taken her vehicle and picked up a gentleman who had a criminal record, it turns out, that my wife and I had never met. And she had her 3-year-old daughter in the back seat. And they were driving to her work. And the idea that my daughter came up with, that she would just have this gentleman drop her off at work and he would drive around with the baby all day. And the more we heard about this individual and his criminal past, and of course we didn't know him, and the baby was 2 or 3, it was just traumatic. And we couldn't understand how this could happen. In fact, the irony of the whole situation was I got a call from the folks that I worked with at the company that purchased our physical therapy practice. And they said, we don't know what's going on with your daughter, but she's got your granddaughter in this car with this guy who's got a checkered past. And my wife and I were so upset. We were like a couple crazy people crying out to God, you've got to bring this baby home. What is going to happen with our granddaughter? And by God's grace, in the early afternoon, my daughter connected with this man, and they did. Our deal with them was, hey, just drop her off. You can go do what you want. And we just, I'd never really prayed that hard in my entire life. And that's when a little light started to go on, that we were really starting to head down the wrong path. And there were always there were other instances, but that one was extremely serious to me. And it also pointed out that she's really not seeing this parental situation clearly. that you cannot be driving around with heroin addicts and criminals in the car with your 2 and 3-year-old granddaughter. So excuse me, daughter. So my wife and I were very concerned, still very hopeful, very optimistic. In fact, I mentioned in an earlier broadcast that I think we both have a PhD in enabling, because we wanted to do everything we could to make this work, and it just wasn't going to happen. So we reached a point where in April of last year, she just left one day and never came back. And she's connected to this gentleman with this serious drug addiction, and he has totaled her car, and she's living on the streets on the east side of Detroit. And that was our cue that can't wait anymore. We've got to step in and to do what we can for this wonderful granddaughter, Grace. And so we became guardians in April 17th of last year. And one of the main problems we had was that we really, because we weren't guardians on paper, even though everyone at the school saw us picking her up and dropping her off and what have you at her elementary school, we didn't have access to homework. We didn't have access to teachers. We really couldn't interface with the parents. And because my daughter was constantly pulling, especially pre-COVID, pulling her out of the school and going to hang out with whoever she was dating at the time, she was not able to build relationships in the neighborhood. And, with young people, they need to have friends. And so it was, it's been quite a journey, Debbie, to be honest with you. And can you just imagine your granddaughter, 2 or 3 years old, driving around Metro Detroit with I think he was a convicted felon, and I didn't know who the gentleman was, and none of my daughter's friends knew who he was. But wow, it's just so it's been really the journey's been about 10 years where we've seen this increase in substance abuse and a just denial of any problem whatsoever, and the behavioral health problems continue to escalate. And so we just began to pray, Lord, if there's any way we can become guardians of this little girl, just clear the path. And that happened in August of last year. And we've seen things turn around for our granddaughter. She's now has all sorts of friends in the neighborhood. The moms that have heard the story about Grace's mom have been so supportive and just so amazing. And because we're a lot older than they are, right? We're in our 60s and they're in their 30s and 40s. They've been amazing and very kind. And so we're very thankful, but it's still been quite a challenge to think that your daughter's living on the streets of east side of Detroit. And that's been a lot to deal with.
So you've had guardianship for almost a year, is that right?
It'll be a year in August. Yep.
Oh, a year in August. Okay, so we're just a few months into this. And was the last time you saw your daughter when she just didn't come home and you decided, okay, this is not going to change and we need to step in?
Well, that we did see her one time after that. And I did tell you we have a PhD in enabling. So she, about 2 weeks after she left with this gentleman, she said, Dad, we've got an opportunity to make some money cutting lawns. I said, oh, you're going to work.
Yeah.
Fantastic. But we don't have a lawnmower. So being the rocket scientist that I am, I said, why don't you borrow my lawnmower?
Oh,
and my trimmer
and enabling.
and oh boy, this is so great. They're going to be making money. Well, as you can imagine, that was the last time we saw the lawnmower, saw the trimmer, and it was one of those eco ones that are all like, battery powered and what have you. So we ended up getting a new lawnmower, but it just became so clear that a normal lifestyle at this point is not going to happen without some professional intervention. We've tried to recommend that. We've tried to set up different interventions with our daughter, but she's, with this gentleman in her life, she's not going to have it at this point in time. So it's been an ongoing challenge.
It's so sad and so clear as mud that when you get involved with drugs, it seems like nothing else matters. You know, your relationship with your mom and dad in your situation, or her daughter. I mean, has she kind of lost? I mean, obviously she has, but I mean, she's kind of lost that sense of connection that she's got a daughter, but I guess that doesn't matter to her. And I'm sure that's very difficult for a lot of us to understand, but there are a lot of us going through that. So I mean, she must have disconnected from that somehow.
It's really hard to explain.
Mhm.
And I was listening to someone in a similar situation, or maybe I was reading in the Detroit News, where a father was talking about his son or daughter on drugs, and he said when his kid got into serious drugs, whether it's crack or whether it's meth or whether it's heroin, he said, I realized I was not dealing with my child anymore. This was a
No.
different individual. So um, if we have a quick phone call with our daughter, and we've had maybe a couple of them in the past 2 months, quick little phone calls. Mostly she'll call when she wants something. And she will ask how her daughter's doing. She might even speak with her daughter for 30 or 60 seconds, but that's about it, because she is only focused on making sure that her friend can get the heroin that he needs to make it through the day, and whatever else she's working on. It's just, and if we think about it too much, my wife and I, it can be so depressing, because we can't, we raised her, sent her to a private Christian high school, and did everything we could to get her. And she had scholarships to every college she applied for, and and now that's the life that we thought was going to happen is not going to happen. So instead of focusing on woe is me, boy, is this ever sad.
Yeah.
This pastor, this sermon, in fact, it was Rick Warren from Saddleback Church, and he said he had a son who had behavioral health issues, who committed suicide. I don't know if you've heard that story or not, but Rick Warren is probably the largest church in the country with 40,000 members or something like that. And he said, I just realized that I can't waste my pain. So he started talking about the behavioral health issues his son had, and all these celebrities out in Hollywood, because his church is in California, that were having behavioral health issues, either personally or with their children, started reaching out to him. And he said, if I can help them, then that's really my purpose here. So how can I help others? And that's the whole point of It's a Grand Life. We're grandparents raising grands, and this whole concept of having a grand family where you have grandparents raising grandchildren, is everywhere. But folks don't know where to get a lot of folks don't have the resources to know where to turn in a situation like this. Do I get an attorney? Do I need to talk to an insurance expert about what's happening? And they do. And in fact, we're working on a new partnership now with a psychotherapy group out of Southfield that is very unique. They are focusing on serving the underserved. So I just imagined, because in my real world life, I do complex care management for at-risk Medicare patients and Medicaid patients, trying to keep them out of the hospital and reduce costs and what have you. And many of our patients are low-income patients. And I just imagined that, boy, if they're in the situation that my wife and I are in, there's a lot of added costs when you start raising kids again. You thought you were done. You're wrong. But what if I was in a situation where we didn't have the resources to talk to a professional behavioral health specialist? And my friend Dottie Foster, who's going to be a guest on our show, Lord willing, in the next month or two, she's been focusing on, and she's a psychotherapist, and she's been focusing on, how do I help folks in the inner city get the type of support that they need to deal with this situation. And so we're really looking forward to partnering with them and being a blessing to folks that don't have the resources. So it's taken us on a different journey, Debbie.
That is absolutely amazing that you are doing that. And I know what I was like when I was 9, going into 13, going into
Yep.
15.
Yep.
And I wouldn't wish that upon anyone. But
Right.
so I can only imagine now you're going to be going through a female going through the teenage years all over again. I bet,
Right.
I was not even thinking that I'm going to have to do this. And I'm sure things have changed generationally as far as, what kids are growing up with now versus even just when your daughter was growing up, let alone when you and I were growing up. So
Right.
so does she remember her mom? Does she know who her mom is?
Well, when her mom was home and Grace was growing up, her if we're really honest, when we look back at her life, unless we were on vacation and on for a spring break in Florida, what have you, where it was kind of a controlled environment, her mom was home a lot to crash. And she would come in and she'd be very tired and she would sleep all day. In fact, there was a time where she worked with me for 2 or 3 years because she had a hard time finding a position. And towards the end, we had an awful time getting her up for work. And it just reached the point where that wasn't going to work out at all. But Grace only remembers the good times, only remembers sitting on mom's bed watching TV, and remembers any song that they ever listened to in the car. That's the first thing she'll say. Oh, my mom loved that song. But that's been several years since she's been in the car with her mom, and her mom doesn't have a car anymore. Her boyfriend totaled it. And so she remembers, and I think we're all like that. When we're grieving, we think back on, the good times of our friend or relative that's no longer around. And the odd thing about where we are within our situation is that we have a neighbor who unfortunately lost a daughter to cervical cancer, and she was in her mid 30s, and it's just, and a young mom, beautiful family. And our neighbor is, of course, devastated about that. She says, I've lost my daughter. And when I heard her say that, it reminded me that, I've lost my daughter too. I mean, she's not at this point in time, she's not the same girl. It's just, we're not going to church on Sunday and dealing with whoever her friend group is or what have you. It's just different. So my granddaughter does remember her mom, only the good times. And I guess that's to be expected.
Yeah, to be expected. So let's focus on a little bit of the good stuff. So what do you do with your granddaughter? What are some activities that you've been able to connect with her on? Locations, hobbies, things with school, outside of school. So tell us a little bit about your relationship, you and your wife's relationship with your granddaughter, and how you're making that work.
Well, I take her for rollerblading and ice skating, and I take her to dance, and I do those things with her. I taught her how to rollerblade, and we went ice skating. I taught her how to ice skate, and it's been a few years since I've been on the
Right,
rollerblades or the ice
right,
skates, and
right.
um, so we're doing that, and we're also trying to engage her friends if they have a half day of school. One time I picked up Grace and a couple of her friends, and we went and had their nails done and had lunch together,
Oh,
and
oh,
and so we're but in the past year, it's been just miraculous how my granddaughter, who was not really connected at the school, everyone knew there was something going on with the mom. She was there, but not really there. Now and we were left in the dark, but now we know the principal, we know the head administrator, we know the teacher. We go to parent teacher conferences. We know a lot of the parents, and I try and volunteer anytime I want. We were selling Girl Scout cookies at one of the
oh my God.
Kroger's in Birmingham, and just trying to jump in like a good dad would, and because I don't want her to feel like she's missing out, and so probably doing more volunteering than I did with my own kids, because you have this fear that she's going to wake up and say no one was there, but I don't really think she can say that. I take her to school every day and I pick her up every day, and we're it's very different because we don't have the same energy that we did,
Yeah.
30 years ago.
Yep.
But it's and what this new podcast has allowed us to do is just learn so much about this whole process and what works and what doesn't work. And we've been interviewing some phenomenal psychotherapists and authors and folks with years and years of experience in dealing with kids in this situation. And some of the interviews have been just terrific. So we are trying to bless other folks in the midst of these challenges.
I agree. So about you,
Mhm.
10, 15 years ago, when you were thinking about retirement, and I'm sure it's different than how you did it, are you able to pull in some of your hopes and dreams that this is what I hope to be doing when I retire in 20 years? Are you able to connect with yourself at all? Because I'm sure that's really important. Yes, you're there for your granddaughter, and those are really, really, but how are you taking care of yourself? How are you pulling in some of your hopes, goals, and dreams for what you thought of retirement would be like?
That's just a great question. What has what has really changed for us post COVID is the same thing that's gone on with all Americans, it appears. Being in healthcare for 35 years and most recently trying to focus on behavioral health a little bit, the statistics have said that since COVID, there's been a 46% increase in behavioral health diagnoses. 46%. And
Yes.
prior to COVID, we had a bunch of behavioral health diagnoses and what have you. And what I have learned about myself and my wife is that we have needed to talk to a professional about where we are. And I'm telling you, 15 years ago, you wouldn't get me to say that in front of a
Ooh,
microphone.
no.
But I just thank God for our therapist every day, because the insight that she gives us saves us, months and months of trying to process this ourselves. And so we're trying. I'm trying anyway as hard as I can to get as many behavioral health professionals on the broadcast, because I think maybe folks aren't as comfortable as I have been talking about this, but they need to hear it. And for example, we had a Ryan Brooks, a very busy Birmingham a psychotherapist, talking about the importance of setting boundaries, that your kids actually thrive when they have boundaries. Well, it had been years since I thought about boundaries, just absolute years. And sure enough, I tried Ryan's advice, and after initial pushback, that has helped a lot. But what you really miss is, I wanted to be the grandparent that had the extra candy at the house that you
Right.
give to the kids. They get,
Yep.
all the wound up, and then you send them home. But,
Bye-bye.
yeah, but we don't have that. Well,
Nope.
she
Nope.
stays home, but
Nope.
um,
Nope. But those
but
boundaries are really important, because you're doing what, any mom or dad would normally do. Is they don't like it at first, but you know what? It's going to be in their DNA. And then when
yep,
they become mom and dad, they're going to say that felt good. And that's how I'm going to teach my kids.
right.
I turned out okay. So, but I want to ask you another super quick question about the psychotherapy. Yes, there is a stigma out there. But what do you say to folks that are like, I don't need a psychotherapist. I can do this on my own. There's nothing wrong with me. That's just for wimps, or that is just for folks that have really deep problems. And that's not me. I can handle this. My dad didn't go. I don't need to go. I can do this on my own. And what do you say to folks like that?
Well, I think there may be some truth to that. You can maybe work out some of your own issues yourself if possible, but I think it will take a lot longer. What I've noticed by having this, by first of all, by interviewing these psychotherapists has been great. If you're thinking you need a psychotherapist, you should go to It's a Grand Life, our podcast, and it's on 30 or more platforms anywhere, and listen to the podcast where we have a psychotherapist, and listen to the advice that they give, then make your decision. My wife and I, my wife's very bright, attorney and still in full-time practice. And We just are amazed at how this therapist that we use, because and turns out that she raised a grandchild as well. So it's really been amazing. We didn't find that out till our first session, but she can cut through what we're going through so fast. That's why you talk to her. Now, if you want to wrestle with something for 6 months, God bless you. I don't want to do that. I don't want to walk around with this cloud over my head. It's bad enough. If I really stop and think long enough, oh boy, this is so sad how things have turned out for my daughter. It is terrible. But if I can help one person, and we find out, we normally hear from one listener a week that says, boy, this really blessed me. That's really all I need to keep this going. So,
No, go ahead.
No, I know it can be a touchy situation, but when this whole idea of do I talk to a behavioral health specialist, but behavioral health in our country right now is exploding. We don't have enough psychotherapists. All the health plans, and tell me if I'm wrong, Debbie, they are paying for psychotherapy, or they're covering a whole lot more than they did. And it was just a couple of years ago, Debbie, I remember, being part of the Michigan Association of Health Plans, going to their meetings up in Lansing and Traverse City, where they were talking about trying to integrate behavioral health and physical medicine, internal medicine and behavioral health. And what a challenge that was. Man, they are way beyond that. I mean, there is such a push to integrate behavioral health, because just lock us up for 2 years and see how we do. It's just affected everybody. So I'm just seeing a lot more openness to discuss behavioral health things, and I'm really thankful for it. But on the other side, I'm really blessed with the podcast, because if you're a psychotherapist and you're on our show, I'm asking you what's going on in our little world, and it really has been a blessing to us. So
I agree. The way that I always look at it, because I've been in therapy myself, and some of my family members have, is, hey, it's a neutral third party. Okay. It's just a third party to bounce some ideas off of and what's going on. And it's just a neutral third party. So, I tried to look at it like, okay, somebody else is just going to maybe offer something that I'm not thinking about. So, it definitely has helped me and other family members. So if people want to listen to you or get in touch with you, or look at trying to find some resources for themselves, how do they do that?
Well, we have a Facebook group called It's a Grand Life. So if they're on Facebook, they should go look us up on It's a Grand Life, or they could go to any of the podcast platforms, whether it's Apple Music or Amazon or Google or Alignable. I believe we're on 30 to 60 different podcast platforms. That we have this amazing producer that has put these podcasts out there, and just makes these shows just so good. And I think if they Google my name or It's a Grand Life, I think they'll be able to find it. And they're, the podcasts are 30 minutes or less, but some of the podcasts with the psychotherapists, those have been my favorite, and they've been, I think they just learn a lot. If they want to hear more about the story, I've got 4 or 5 where we talk about that, and that I had a friend from church the other day call my wife and say, I didn't know much about Craig's podcast, and I heard that story about your granddaughter driving in the car with the guy all day, and she said, I just listened to it and just bawled my head off. And
I know,
it's but if we can bless one person, then it's worth it.
I agree. And I'm sure that we will put up all the information that's necessary to have folks get in touch with you, because like you said, if we can help one person, then it's definitely worth it. So what a powerful podcast. You have been wonderful. And I'm sorry you're going through what you're going through, but there's a reason for it. We may not know it now, but there's a reason for it. And this, I hope, is going to touch a lot of folks. And if we just get one, then it definitely was worth it. I know I enjoyed my time, and I hope all of you enjoyed it as well. So we hope you enjoyed this episode of Simply Medicare. Craig, thanks again for being on this podcast with us and sharing your touching story. It means so much to me, and it was getting me choked up a couple of times. Even though I've listened to your podcast, I'm trying to put myself in your situation, and I'm thinking, how would I be able to do that? But with grace and dignity, you're able to do that. So I look forward to seeing everyone next time. Check us out on all the different locations that you can get your podcast. Once again, I'm Debbie Straub, your Michigan Medicare specialist. Thanks for listening to this episode of Simply Medicare, and we'll catch you next time. And that's another edition of Simply Medicare with Debbie Straub. Looking forward to chatting with you soon. If you've enjoyed this edition of Simply Medicare podcast and you don't want to miss any future episodes, please make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Please also leave comments and offer feedback so we can make this podcast the best it can be for you. If you need assistance with your Medicare sign-up or you just have general Medicare questions, make sure to reach out to me at 248-227-0347. You can also reach me online at MichiganMedicareSpecialist.com or through my email at Debbie@MichiganMedicareSpecialist.com. I really look forward to working with you soon.